Some legends were never meant to be remembered. Yet in the Appalachian Mountains, whispers refuse to stay buried. Stories of crying hollows, black-eyed brides, and voices that echo long after the dead have gone silent. These are not campfire tales. These are truths passed down in hushed tones, warnings scratched into the bones of the land itself. Tonight, we'll uncover 12 forgotten Appalachian legends, each darker than you could ever imagine. And once you've heard them, you may wish you hadn't. This is Farcical Fears, where every story leaves its mark. If you're brave enough to keep listening, make sure to subscribe and join us, because these mountains have many more secrets, and we're just getting started. Let's move to our one story. They say the mountains keep secrets. Some are carved in stone, some buried in soil, and others whispered about in gas stations and truck stops long after midnight. The story of the black-eyed bride is one of those. Secrets the kind that creeps into the mind and makes you question every dark stretch of road, every lonely figure on the shoulder. I first heard it from a trucker named Dale, a man whose voice cracked like gravel and whiskey. He wasn't the type for tall tales. In fact, he hated them. Said stories like this one weren't meant to entertain, they were warnings. He swore up and down that what he saw wasn't a ghost or some trick of the eyes. He said it was real, and once you've heard his story, you might understand why he never took that stretch of road again. It all began in the summer of 1962. Along a winding 2-lane road outside of Harlan, Kentucky, a young couple, just married, still dressed in their wedding clothes, were driving down the mountain after a late reception. Nobody knows for sure what happened, but the sheriff's report said their car swerved off the road and crashed into the ravine. The groom was thrown clear, battered but alive. His bride, however, wasn't so lucky. The impact killed her instantly. At least, that's the official version. But people in town started whispering that the groom stumbled into the nearest farmhouse hours later, white as a sheet, babbling that his wife had gotten out of the car, that she had climbed back up the embankment in her mud-soaked dress, her face pale, her eyes black as coal. He swore she walked beside him down the road, silent as the grave, until she vanished into the dark. The townsfolk chalked it up to shock, grief, maybe even a concussion. But after the funeral, strange reports began trickling in. Drivers said they saw a woman in a torn wedding dress standing by the roadside, head bowed, hands clasped, as if in prayer. Some swore she lifted her face when headlights hit her, and when she did, her eyes were nothing but empty black sockets. By the late 70s, truckers passing through that part of the Appalachians all knew the tale. Some refused to take that route after dusk. Others carried charms, crosses, or simply muttered prayers when the road narrowed and the forest pressed close. Dale was one of the latter, until the night he picked her up. He told me it was October, a night as black as coal dust, the kind where the mountains swallow even the moonlight. He was hauling freight, half asleep on caffeine pills and old country radio. Around 2 a.m, he spotted a figure up ahead, standing by the roadside. She was still, he said, voice low. Not waving, not walking, just standing. Her dress was dirty, but I could see plain as day. It was a wedding gown. And I thought to myself, that ain't right, out here, this late. But exhaustion makes men foolish, and Dale wasn't about to leave someone stranded. He slowed, rolled down his window, and asked if she needed a ride. She didn't speak, just nodded, and climbed into the cab. He swore her dress smelled of damp earth, like fresh-turned soil. She sat rigid, hands folded neatly on her lap. Her face was pale, lips colorless. She never looked at him, never blinked, just stared straight ahead at the windshield. Dale tried to make small talk, asking where she was headed, but she stayed silent. And then, he said. She turned. Her face shifted toward him with unnatural slowness, her eyes glinting in the dashboard light. Not eyes, exactly, just black pools, darker than night, bottomless and empty. He said his chest tightened like someone had tied a rope around his lungs. He couldn't breathe, couldn't even look away. Finally, she spoke. Take me home. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, but it carried a weight that made Dale's blood run cold. He asked where home was, but she didn't answer. She just turned back to the windshield, her thin hands tightening on her dress. He drove on, sweating knuckles white on the wheel. The silence was unbearable, broken only by the rattle of the truck and the faint rustle of fabric when she shifted. And then, just as suddenly as she'd appeared, she was gone. No sound, no movement. 1 second she was sitting there, the next, the passenger seat was empty. Dale pulled over, heart hammering, and searched the cab from top to bottom. Nothing. Just the lingering smell of damp earth. When he finally made it into town, he asked around at a diner, trying to explain what he'd seen. The waitress went pale. She said her grandmother used to talk about the black-eyed bride, a restless spirit who wandered the roads, searching for the groom who left her behind in death. Some said she cursed those who ignored her. Others claimed she followed men home, watching them as they slept. Dale didn't sleep that night. In fact, he said he barely slept for weeks after. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, blank, pale, with eyes like two pits of nothingness. Years passed, and the legend only grew. Some truckers claimed she climbed into their rigs uninvited, appearing in the back seat when they glanced into their mirrors. Others said she would follow their headlights, floating just at the edge of the beam, before vanishing into the dark. Skeptics dismiss it as hysteria, tricks of exhaustion, or the power of a well-told story. But those who've seen her say otherwise. They describe the same details: the ruined dress, the smell of soil, the silent stare. Too many witnesses spread across decades for it to be coincidence. Dale passed away a few years back, but he swore until his dying day that what he saw was no hallucination. He said she was real, and worse than that, she knew him. He claimed she whispered his name before she vanished. I don't know if that part is true, but here's what unsettles me most. Every time I drive through that stretch of Appalachia, I can't help but glance at the shoulder of the road. And sometimes, I swear I see a figure standing there, dress ragged, face turned away. And when my headlights sweep across her, I pray she doesn't look up. Because if she does, I don't think I'll ever make it home. Let's move to our tooth story. There are places in the Appalachian Mountains that seem to swallow sound. Stand at the mouth of an old coal mine and speak, and you'll find your voice doesn't echo the way you expect. Instead, it feels absorbed, muffled, pulled inward by the earth itself. Locals say that's because the mountains remember. They hold on to everything, every word, every scream, every life that's been lost inside them. In 1993, 4 friends from Tennessee drove into eastern Kentucky with nothing more than a camcorder, a box of flashlights, and a hunger for proof of the paranormal. They called themselves ghost hunters, though in truth, they were just college kids chasing the thrill of fear. The abandoned Black Hollow mine was their target, a site shuttered. Since the 1940s, after a cave-in killed nearly a dozen miners, stories swirled for decades afterward, strange cries echoing in the night. Lights flickering deep inside despite the tunnels being sealed, and shadows that didn't belong to any living man. The group never made it back. What remained was a single camcorder found weeks later, wedged in a crack near the mine's entrance, its battery drained but its tape still intact. Locals whispered about it for years, but most never saw the footage. A sheriff's deputy who did claimed he destroyed the original copy. Still, somehow, duplicates survived, and the legend of the holotape spread like wildfire. The recording begins, innocently enough, for voices, laughing nervously, teasing one another as they park their truck and hike toward the gaping mouth of the mine. The camera shakes, catches glimpses of their backpacks, their pale, jittery faces lit by the flashlight beams. At first, it feels like any amateur exploration, the kind of thing that would bore anyone who wasn't there. But then the tone shifts. About 10 minutes in, they stop laughing. The mine's entrance looms in front of them, a jagged black maw in the mountainside. Wooden beams rotting rusted rails leading inward. The camera lingers on it as if reluctant to move closer. One of the friends mutters that it feels like standing at the mouth of something alive, like the tunnel itself is breathing. They step inside anyway. Their voices echo strangely, not like in normal caverns, but flat, distorted, almost reversed. As they walk, the air grows heavier. The tape records the sound of dripping water, distant but rhythmic, like footsteps pacing deeper inside. The flashlights catch carvings on the wall, names, dates, and strange symbols no one can quite recognize. By the 30-minute mark, the group is quieter. The one holding the camera keeps swinging the beam over his shoulder, as if certain something is following them. The others whisper about hearing voices, but the audio only captures faint static, almost like the tape itself is resisting the sound. At one point, the camera jerks violently toward a side tunnel. The light catches movement, something pale and formless, vanishing before it can be focused on. Panic sets in. Their breaths grow ragged, their steps quicker. But the mind doesn't seem to let them out. No matter which direction they turn, they return to the same chamber with collapsed beams and rusted rails. Their laughter is gone, replaced by muttered prayers and frightened arguments. The dripping sound grows louder, closer, until one of them screams that it isn't water at all, it's voices. Hundreds of them, whispering in unison. The camera catches a moment that still unsettles anyone who's seen it. The beam pans across the tunnel wall, and for an instant, faces seem to emerge from the stone, dozens of hollow-eyed figures pressing outward, their mouths moving soundlessly. When the light shifts again, the wall is bare. Then comes the worst part. 47 minutes into the recording, one of the friends stares directly into the lens. His pupils are dilated, his face slick with sweat. His lips tremble as he whispers, "It's in the walls." The words repeat, over and over, until the others drag him out of frame. His voice, however, doesn't stop. It grows louder, layered, as if the mine itself is speaking through him. The final minutes are chaos. Flashlights flicker, batteries die, screams echo. The camera tumbles to the ground, its lens tilted upward at the dripping stone ceiling. Shadows move across its impossible shapes, too large to belong to the group. And then, silence. The tape ends abruptly with a high-pitched shriek of static, the kind of sound that makes your teeth ache. No bodies were ever recovered. No evidence of where the four friends went. Just the camcorder, left, as if deliberately placed for someone to find, to this day. Locals warn outsiders not to go near Black Hollow Mine. They say the mountain doesn't just trap men beneath its stone, it keeps their voices, their souls, pulling in anyone foolish enough to listen. Some even claim that playing the tape itself is dangerous, that it carries whatever lives in those tunnels into the room with you. Trucker from the first story once told me he knew a man who watched the tape in his living room. The man swore he could hear dripping in the walls of his own house afterward, could hear whispers through the plaster when he tried to sleep. Weeks later, his wife found him staring blankly at the basement wall, lips moving silently, eyes black. As coal dust. Skeptics argue, it's just urban legend, a Blair Witch-style hoax passed around to scare kids. But those who've handled the tape reel, or duplicated, say the same thing. The static at the end feels wrong, like it isn't just noise, but something alive, burrowing into your ears. And once you've heard it, you don't forget, even now. Some nights, people swear they see a faint light flickering inside the mine, far beyond where the tunnels collapsed. Others claim to hear voices, if they stand at the entrance too long. Voices that sound eerily like the four friends who vanished. The holotape has become more than a story. It's a warning, a reminder that some echoes should never be followed, and some recordings should never be played. Because if the mountains truly do remember everything, then maybe those four voices are still in there, calling out, waiting for someone new to join them. And if you hear dripping behind your walls tonight, you might want to pray it's just a leak. Let's move to our 3 story. Every Appalachian town has its place you don't go. Not because of fences or laws, but because of whispers. In one little town, tucked deep in the Kentucky hills, that place was known as the Weeping Hollow. Parents warned their children never to wander near it after dark. Preachers shook their heads when asked about it. Old-timers swore there were reasons, though they'd never say them out loud. The hollow wasn't remarkable at first glance. Just a dip in the land, where the trees grew taller and the fog lingered longer. But those who lived near it knew the sound that came at dusk. It wasn't wind, though some tried to call it that. It wasn't coyotes or owls. It was crying soft at first, like a woman mourning, then sharper, like a child lost in the woods. The closer you got, the more it changed. Sometimes it was a baby, sometimes a man, sometimes a chorus, as though the hollow itself remembered every tear shed inside it. The earliest tale dates back to the 1800s, when settlers carved out farms on the ridgeline. A family moved too close to the hollow and lost 3 of their children in one season. The first wandered off, lured by what he thought was his mother calling. The second disappeared, trying to find the first. The third vanished right from the yard, though no one heard a sound. The grieving parents swore they heard all 3 crying in the hollow at sundown. The father went to fetch them, gun in hand. He never came back. His wife left within the week, saying the hollow could keep what it wanted. Years later, in the 1940s, it happened again. 3 children from town dared each other to play hide-and-seek near the hollow. They were never seen again. The only thing found was a shoe in the underbrush, soaked through not with rain, but with salt water, as if it had been dropped in the ocean. No one could explain it. The nearest sea was hundreds of miles away. From then on, people said the hollow didn't just weep. It took. I first heard the story from a man named Carter, whose grandfather had been a deputy in that same town. Carter said his grandfather never spoke much about the hollow, but one night after too much whiskey, he let something slip. He said he'd been there the evening after the children went missing. He said the crying was real, so real he could name which child's voice belongs to which sound. He said it made the hairs on his arms stand up, not because it sounded ghostly, but because it sounded alive. Others told stranger tales. Hunters claimed to see figures moving in the fog, shadows of children darting between the trees, calling out in familiar voices. Mothers swore they heard their babies crying outside the window at night, though their children were asleep in bed. A preacher who tried to bless the hollow fell ill the next morning and coughed himself into the grave within a month. The town stopped asking God to fix it. Instead, they simply stayed away. But the hollow has a way of luring the curious. Outsiders who didn't know the rules sometimes wandered in. Most came back, shaken but unharmed. A few never did. And those who returned often swore they weren't alone in the woods, that someone, or something, had followed them back. One story in particular stuck with me. In the 1970s, a teenager named Ellen lived near the hollow. One night, she claimed, she heard her younger brother crying outside. She rushed out, barefoot, following the sound through the fog. The crying always seemed just ahead of her, leading her deeper and deeper into the trees. She didn't stop until she realized she'd gone too far. That's when she saw them. 3 children standing at the edge of the hollow, dressed in clothes from another era. Their faces were pale, eyes glassy with tears. They beckoned her closer, whispering her name. Ellen swore their mouths didn't move when they spoke. She ran home, and when her brother asked why she was bleeding from her feet, she said nothing. She left town within the year. I asked Carter once if he thought the hollow was cursed land, some ancient burial site or place of violence. He shook his head. It ain't cursed, he said. It's hungry, and maybe that's the truest way to put it. A place that feeds on sorrow, lures with sound, and keeps what it takes. Not evil for evil's sake, but simply insatiable even. Now folks say the hollow weeps at sundown. Those who live nearby close their windows tight, drown the sound with radios or prayers. Travelers sometimes hear it without knowing the story. They'll say it sounded like a woman, or a child, or a friend calling from the woods. Some even follow the sound, though they rarely go far before something in their gut tells them to turn back. But if you ever hear crying in those mountains, you'll know. It won't sound distant. It won't sound like a stranger. It'll sound like someone you love, someone you can't ignore. That's how the hollow pulls you in. And if you don't resist, you'll join the others. Lost voices, echoing forever, weeping in the fog. So when night falls in the Appalachians, and the wind carries a sound like mourning, remember this story. Don't follow, don't answer. Because once the hollow knows your name, it'll never stop calling. Let's move to our 4th story. Every town in the mountains has its healer. Some use herbs, others prayers, and some things they don't talk about in daylight. In one forgotten corner of Appalachia, there was a man they called the Bone Man. His real name was lost long ago. if he ever had one. But the stories about him remain. The Bone Man didn't live in the town itself. He stayed in the woods, past a ridge no one crossed after sunset, in a crooked shack patched with tin and bark. Folks said he was tall, too tall for his frame, with arms that seemed to hang too far down, and a face that always stayed in shadow, beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Some said his eyes glowed in firelight. Others said he had no eyes at all, just two hollows where bones shone through. But people still went to him, because as much as he frightened them, the Bone Man was known to heal. When a child burned with fever, the doctors from town couldn't help, but the Bone Man could. When a farmer's leg shattered, too broken to save, the Bone Man made him walk again. He didn't ask for money, and he didn't take favors. Instead, he asked for something stranger. He asked for a bone, not the whole body, not the flesh, just one bone, small or large, a finger, a rib, a tooth pulled from the mouth. The payment had to be bone. No one knew why. Some guessed he built charms from them. Some whispered he ground them into powders for his cures. Others swore he collected them, building a hidden skeleton from borrowed pieces, a body not his own. Whatever the truth was, people paid, because his cures always worked. Always at first, the townsfolk convinced themselves it was harmless. What's one tooth, if your child lives? What's one rib, if your wife recovers? But over time, something darker began to show. Those who gave bones never seemed quite the same afterward. One woman who gave her finger to save. Her daughter said she could feel that missing finger still itching, burning, reaching for things at night. Another man who gave a rib claimed he could hear faint scratching sounds from under his bed when he tried to sleep, like something crawling on all fours, searching for what was taken. And then came the dreams. Everyone who paid the Bone Man dreamed of him, standing at the foot of their bed, hat pulled low, empty face smiling, his long, long arms reaching toward them. But when they woke, nothing was there. The strangest tale was of a girl named Lottie. She was 12 when she came down with a sickness that twisted her lungs. Her family, desperate, carried her to the Bone Man. He agreed to save her, but he asked for something larger than usual. Her father's arm bone, clean from elbow to wrist. Her father gave it willingly. They said he screamed so loud you could hear him across the ridge. But Lottie lived, and the Bone Man kept his payment. A year later, Lottie began to change. She grew taller, too tall for her age. Her arms stretched long, her fingers bending oddly, like they were made for reaching in places others couldn't. At night, she would sit outside the house, whispering in a low voice that wasn't hers. Her mother swore she heard her daughter, talking to someone unseen, someone who answered back from the trees. The townsfolk said the Bone Man hadn't just saved her. He had marked her, claimed her. Lottie disappeared one night, just before her 13th birthday. Her mother swore she saw her walking into the woods, her arms impossibly long, her shadow stretched in ways it shouldn't have. No one followed. By then, they knew better. Others vanished too, though never all at once. A boy who gave a tooth to save his sister went missing 3 years later. A farmer who gave his rib was found dead, his chest caved in, as if something had reached in and taken it back. A woman who gave her kneecap was found kneeling in her yard one morning, her legs frozen solid, her mouth wide open, as if she'd been screaming all night. The town grew quiet about the Bone Man. They stopped speaking his name in daylight. They warned children never to wander too far, never to answer when someone in the woods called your name. But the cures kept working. And so, people kept going. That's the cruelest part of the story. Everyone knew the price. Everyone had heard the warnings. But when death came knocking, they always went to the Bone Man. Fear of him was never stronger than fear of losing someone you loved. There was one last story about him, told by a man named James, who was old enough to remember the Bone Man with his own eyes. He said, when his wife grew sick, he went to the shack. The Bone Man answered the door before he could knock, as if he'd been waiting. James begged him for help. The Bone Man nodded, slow and deliberate, and told him the price. James said no. For once, he refused. But when James turned to leave, the Bone Man leaned down close and whispered something. James never said what, only that his wife died the next morning, and he never slept another night in peace. he said when he closed his eyes. He still saw the bone man standing at the foot of his bed, arms too long, hat pulled low, waiting. James died a year later. Not from sickness, not from age. They found him in the woods, all his bones missing, his body collapsed like an empty sack. And here's the strangest thing. The shack where the bone man lived is gone now. Burned, collapsed, lost to vines. But sometimes, hikers in those woods say they stumble across something. A bone, clean white, polished smooth, lying on the forest floor, as if waiting. They say if you pick it up, you'll start hearing footsteps behind you. You'll see a shadow move where it shouldn't. You'll dream of a tall man with a hat and arms too long. And sooner or later, he'll come collect, because once the bone man gives you a gift, he always takes something in return. Always. And that's why no one says his name aloud anymore. That's why the old folks shudder when they hear bones crack in a fire, or see a stray dog digging up something pale from the earth. The bone man doesn't die. They say he doesn't age. He doesn't fade. He just waits. And he's always hungry. So if you ever find yourself lost in the Appalachian woods, and you hear someone calling your name from a place that feels too dark, too deep, remember this story. Don't follow. Don't answer. Don't pick up anything lying at your feet, because the bone man's gift is never free. Let's move to our fifth story. There is a creek in eastern Kentucky that twists through the mountains like a pale vein, and it has a reputation older than anyone alive. Locals call it Dry Creek, though the name is a lie. It is never truly dry. It whispers and gurgles, and those who walk its banks at night claim the water seems to move against its current, pulling toward some unseen source. The legend begins with a hollow man. Nobody knows his real name, or if he ever had one, but everyone who has lived in the area for more than a few years knows the story. He was said to have been a miner in the late 1800s, a man of middling height and gaunt features, who disappeared in the mountains one winter when a mine shaft collapsed. Some say he died instantly, crushed beneath tons of rock. Others swear he survived and changed into something no human should be. The first warnings came in whispers. Children claimed they saw him standing at the edge of the creek at dusk, tall and skeletal, eyes deep black holes, mouth stretched too wide in a grin that moved with its own rhythm. Livestock would vanish without trace, leaving only footprints leading to the water's edge. Fishermen reported their hooks snagged something heavy under the water that tugged with unnatural strength. And sometimes, when they pulled their lines in, they saw the outline of a human form beneath the rippling surface, staring at them with hollow eyes before vanishing. It wasn't until the 1930s that the disappearances became impossible to ignore. A family of 4 vanished in the middle of a stormy night. Their cabin was locked from the inside. Outside, the ground leading to the creek was churned, footprints ending abruptly at the water. When neighbors investigated, they swore they heard the creek singing a high-pitched guttural wail, rising and falling like a chorus of voices fused into one. The sheriff dismissed it as hysteria, yet a local teacher, a woman named Martha, insisted the creek was calling, and that the hollow man had claimed them. The hollow man's victims were never seen again. Some say he collects people the same way. The creek collects water, slow, inexorable, inevitable. Others claim he drags the living into Dry Creek, and in the water they change, becoming hollowed. Faceless beings who roam the banks at night, waiting for others. Locals began leaving offerings, scraps of food, coins, small trinkets, at the creek's edge, hoping to appease whatever haunted it. It was said the hollow man could sense fear, and fear made him hungry. One story stands out, told by a man named Thomas, whose grandfather had been a miner. Thomas said he was 12 when he first saw the hollow man. He and a friend had snuck out to the creek on a dare. It was a foggy autumn evening, the wind dragging leaves across the water. Thomas said they were throwing sticks into the creek, laughing and shivering, when they heard a low voice behind them. It wasn't a voice like theirs. It wasn't even human. It was dry, like bones rubbing together, whispering their names. They turned, and Thomas swore he saw a tall figure, impossibly thin, standing waist-deep in the water. Its eyes were black voids, reflecting nothing, and its grin stretched far wider than it should have. Its arms hung low, brushing the surface of the creek like tendrils. The boy ran without looking back, dragging his friend with him. When they reached the nearest cabin, the water behind them was still calm as though nothing had been there. Thomas never forgot it. For years afterward, he said he could hear the hollow man calling in the creek when he slept, low and guttural, promising that one day it would come for him. The disappearances continued, teenagers daring each other to walk the banks at night, hunters venturing too far from their trails, lone travelers. Some made it back, screaming and muttering incoherently, their hair white as ash, their hands trembling. Others vanished entirely. Those who returned never stayed in the region long. By the 1960s, the hollow man had become a cautionary tale. Mothers used him to frighten children into obedience. Men spoke his name quietly around campfires, never making direct eye contact with the creek. Yet despite warnings, people still vanished. Fear slowed them, but it never stopped him. Thomas grew up, but he never left the mountains entirely. In his adulthood, he returned to Dry Creek, now a man with a family. One evening, he was walking along the banks when he saw movement in the fog. A figure rose from the water, tall, skeletal, with hollow eyes, and for the first time, it didn't hide, it watched him. Thomas froze. His heart hammered. The hollow man raised one arm and pointed toward the water. Thomas felt an invisible current tug at him, like the creek itself had reached out. He ran. He later learned that his niece, a child of 10, had gone missing near the creek that same night. No one spoke about it openly. The creek's surface remained calm, indifferent to the tragedy. Some claim that if you walk the banks of Dry Creek at night, you can hear the hollow man's laughter, a hollow, dry, echoing sound that mixes with the rush of water. He waits for those who stray too close, for those who dare to answer when the creek whispers. And if you see him, they say, you can't ignore him. You can't outrun him. The water will call to you, the fog will swallow you, and the hollow man will claim what he wants. Even today, people leave small offerings along the bank's coins, flowers, scraps of food, though no one knows if they work. They do it out of habit, or hope, or sheer terror. The hollow man does not speak. He does not bargain. He does not explain. He waits, patient and eternal, in the waters of Dry Creek, for the next soul foolish enough to wander too close. And when the creek whispers your name in the fog, when the water seems to move against its current, when a shadow stretches across its surface that shouldn't be, do not turn your back. Do not run, because the hollow man is patient, and he always finishes what he begins. Let's move to our sixth story. There's a ridge in the Appalachians that no one climbs after dusk. Locals call it Black Ridge, and they all tell the same warning. Don't follow the light. Few remember why, but those who do, whisper of a lantern that floats in the night, moving against the wind, leading travelers off the trail and into the dark where no one returns. The first account comes from the 1920s. A miner named Silas had been drinking in a tavern near the foot of the ridge when someone dared him to hike to the top and return by midnight. Silas, proud and defiant, grabbed his coat and set off. As he climbed, the sun set, leaving only shadows and the first glimmer of a light hovering just ahead. It was a lantern, old and copper, swinging gently, though no one carried it. Silas, curious and stubborn, followed hours past. When the townsfolk found him the next morning, he was wandering near the creek below, muttering about the faces in the light and the ones waiting in the black. He never returned to the ridge. The stories spread quickly. Locals began calling the figure, the lantern keeper, a spirit, or a curse. No one could be certain. They claimed the lantern moved deliberately, slow and teasing, shifting as if it knew the traveler's fears. If you chased it, it led you deeper into the ridge's shadows. If you ignored it, it disappeared only to reappear somewhere else. Most who followed the lantern were never seen again. Those who returned did so changed, pale, silent, haunted. In 1976, a group of college students from Kentucky decided to test the legend. They hiked up Black Ridge, laughing, cameras in hand, hoping to capture proof of the supernatural. At first nothing happened. The sun dipped, the ridge darkened, and then, from the mist, the lantern appeared, copper glinting, swinging slowly. In the fog, hovering just above the ground, The students called out, daring one another to approach. The lantern moved further into the shadows. The first student, a girl named Martha, chased it, flashlight shaking in her hand. The lantern bobbed ahead, retreating when she neared, drawing her along a narrow path lined with old stumps and rotting trees. Her friends shouted warnings, but she didn't hear them. By the time they realized she was gone, the lantern had vanished, leaving only a faint copper smell in the air. They searched all night, but Martha never returned. Over the years, multiple sightings reinforced the terror. Farmers returning home at dusk would see the lantern hovering along the ridgeline, moving silently, almost beckoning. Hunters would report hearing whispers carried with the wind, faint voices chanting in rhythm with the lantern's swaying. Sometimes, people claimed the lantern contained a face within the flame, twisted, pale, staring through the veil of fire, as if counting the lost. One story that circulates often is about a man named George. He was a logger in the 1940s, known for his bravado and skill with an axe. One evening, he stayed too late, cutting trees on the lower slopes of Black Ridge. The sun had set, and mist rose from the forest floor like smoke. A glow appeared between the trees, the lantern. George laughed at first, shaking his head, but curiosity gnawed at him. He walked toward it. The lantern bobbed along, hovering over stumps, weaving through brambles. George followed, deeper and deeper. Hours passed. The wind shifted. The glow reflected in George's eyes, and he swore he saw shadowed figures moving in the fog behind it. Pale faces with mouths open in silent screams. He panicked and ran back toward what he thought was the trail. But the ridge was different. Trees seemed closer together, paths looping back on themselves, and every time he looked behind, the lantern hovered just out of reach. George stumbled and fell into a gully. When he regained his footing, the lantern had disappeared, replaced by faint whispers surrounding him. He ran until dawn, finally collapsing near the base of the ridge. His eyes had changed. They were wide, unblinking, and haunted. He never returned to the ridge, and when asked about the lantern, he only muttered, "It knows who follows. It knows who fears. It waits." Locals believe the lantern isn't just a spirit, but a lure. It chooses the most curious, the most daring, those who underestimate the mountain's memory. Some claim the lantern keeper is the soul of a miner lost in a cave collapsed decades ago, cursed to roam the ridge and draw others to join him. Others argue it's a manifestation of the ridge itself, alive and sentient, feeding on fear and hubris alike. In modern times, hikers still vanish. They often leave behind personal items, cameras, water bottles, backpacks at the edge of the ridge, as if the lantern itself had dropped them. Those who survive tell similar tales. A pale, coppery light floats before them, sometimes just far enough to keep them chasing, whispering unintelligible words, urging them onward. They describe a scent of smoke, metal, and something sweetly decayed, filling the air around the lantern. One final tale comes from a woman named Clara. She was exploring Black Ridge in the early 2000s, determined to debunk the legend. She arrived just before sunset. Fog curled around the stumps and rocks, dampening every sound. When the lantern appeared, swinging gently, she froze. Its flame glowed like molten copper, and for a brief moment, she thought she saw faces twisting inside the light, mouths opening and closing silently. Clara tried to back away, but the lantern moved with her. She ran, twisting along the ridge, heart pounding. The forest seemed to shift, roots blocking paths, branches tugging at her jacket. The lantern hovered ahead, copper flame glinting in her eyes. When she finally emerged near a familiar clearing, she turned to see it one last time. The lantern hovered over the ridge, still and silent, as though waiting for the next traveler. Clara fled the mountains and never returned. To this day, the lantern of Black Ridge haunts the ridgeline. Farmers, hikers, hunters, and curious travelers report glimpses of its copper glow at dusk. Locals warn, but outsiders ignore them. And those who chase the light rarely return, or, if they do, they are changed. Eyes wide and haunted. Voices trembling when they speak of it, forever aware that the ridge watches and waits. And some say that, if you see the lantern, it isn't enough to just run. You must resist the compulsion to follow it. Resist the temptation to know what lies ahead, or the ridge will claim you. The lantern keeper waits, patient and eternal, drawing the brave, the curious, and the foolish into the blackened heart of the mountains. Because the lantern of Black Ridge is alive. And it remembers by the 1960s, the Hollow Man had become a cautionary tale. Mothers used him to frighten children into obedience. Men spoke his name quietly around campfires, never making direct eye contact with the creek. Yet despite warnings, people still vanished. Fear slowed them, but it never stopped him. Thomas grew up, but he never left the mountains entirely. In his adulthood, he returned to Dry Creek, now a man with a family. One evening, he was walking along the banks when he saw a movement in the fog. A figure rose from the water, tall, skeletal, with hollow eyes, and for the first time, it didn't hide. It watched him. Thomas froze, his heart hammered. The Hollow Man raised one arm and pointed toward the water. Thomas felt an invisible current tug at him, like the creek itself had reached out. He ran. He later learned that his niece, a child of 10, had gone missing near the creek that same night. No one spoke about it openly. The creek's surface remained calm, indifferent to the tragedy. Some claim that if you walk the banks of Dry Creek at night, you can hear the Hollow Man's laughter, a hollow, dry, echoing sound that mixes with the rush of water. He waits for those who stray too close, for those who dare to answer when the creek whispers. And if you see him, they say, you can't ignore him. You can't outrun him. The water will call to you, the fog will swallow you, and the Hollow Man will claim what he wants. Even today, people leave small offerings along the bank's coins. Flowers, scraps of food. Though no one knows if they work, they do it out of habit, or hope, or sheer terror. The Hollow Man does not speak. He does not bargain. He does not explain. He waits, patient and eternal, in the waters of Dry Creek. For the next soul, foolish enough to wander too close, and when the creek whispers your name in the fog, when the water seems to move against its current, when a shadow stretches across its surface that shouldn't be, do not turn your back. Do not run. Because the Hollow Man is patient, and he always finishes what he begins. Let's move to our 7th story. Raven's Peak rises abruptly from the rolling hills of eastern Appalachia. Its craggy cliffs and dense forests cloaked in mist and legend. Locals call the forest surrounding the peak the Whispering Hollow, for it is said that the trees themselves speak at night, murmuring secrets no one should hear. Those who have entered after dark tell of voices echoing from nowhere, whispering names, fears, and memories, driving the bravest men and women to madness. The earliest tales stretch back to the late 1800s, when loggers first tried to clear the foothills. Entire crews vanished without trace. The only clue left behind was a collection of hastily abandoned tools and the faint murmur of voices on the wind. Some claimed the Hollow demanded payment for their trespass. Others whispered that the forest itself had become alive, aware of human intrusion, and that it claimed those who did not respect it. A man named Eli Hargrove, one of the first settlers to live near Raven's Peak, recounted his encounter decades later. He had been hunting deer one autumn evening when he wandered deeper into the hollow than intended. The sun set quickly behind the ridgeline, and the forest fell into an unnatural silence. Then, he said, the whispering began. At first it was soft, almost comforting, as though the trees were calling his name. But soon, the whispers grew urgent, commanding, telling him to leave his rifle, his coat, and finally, his own shoes. Fear clawed at him, but curiosity drove him forward. Eli described the voices as both familiar and alien. They whispered things only he knew. His mother's secret fear of the dark, the shame of a lie he had told as a boy, the hidden longing he had never admitted to anyone. At the same time, the hollow seemed to weave in other voices, those of men and women he had never met, whispering in languages that felt instinctively understandable. He said it was impossible to ignore. Every step he took, deeper into the hollow, made the voices louder, more personal, more insistent. By midnight, Eli had lost all sense of direction. The trees seemed to close around him, branches, like fingers, brushing his shoulders, guiding him toward a central clearing. There, in the heart of the hollow, he saw them, shadowed figures. Neither fully human nor fully animal, perched on fallen logs and standing in the mist. Their faces were hidden, but he felt their eyes on him, watching, judging. The whispers crescendoed into a roar. Eli screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the forest. Somehow, he managed to stumble backward, retracing his steps in a daze. When he finally emerged near his cabin, hours had passed, though it felt like days. Eli swore he had left pieces of himself in the hollow, his confidence, his innocence, even parts of his memory. After that night, he never entered the forest again. Over time, stories of the Whispering Hollow grew. Hikers, hunters, and curious children reported hearing voices in the fog, calling their names, recounting personal details they had never shared. Some followed the whispers and returned shaken, speaking in hushed tones, their eyes sunken, their hands trembling. Others disappeared entirely. Their fates a mystery whispered only in fearful conversation at local taverns. One particularly chilling story concerns a schoolteacher named Margaret. She had moved to the area in the 1950s, determined to explore Raven's Peak despite warnings. One evening, she ventured into the hollow to collect rare herbs for her class. At first, the forest was quiet, unnervingly so. Then, the whispering began. Soft, melodic, almost hypnotic, the voices called her name repeatedly, coaxing her further into the fog. Margaret, confident in her education and sense of reason, tried to ignore the voices, but they adapted, weaving her own thoughts and insecurities into the murmurings. She heard the regrets she had buried for years, the mistakes of her students she could not forgive herself for, and her own unfulfilled desires echoing through the mist. Panic seized her. She ran, twisting and turning through the hollow, but the forest seemed to shift around her. Paths looped back on themselves, trees appeared where none had been moments before. Hours later, she emerged at the edge of the forest, exhausted and delirious. She claimed that something followed her, a presence that lingered, whispering in her dreams, reminding her that she had been marked. Margaret left the town soon after, but locals reported that even years later, on foggy nights, they could hear a faint voice calling from the ridge, her voice among the whispers. By the 1970s, the Whispering Hollow had become infamous. Local children dared one another to enter, knowing full well the consequences. Adults avoided the area, and those who worked in the forests of Raven's Peak always carried charms, prayers, or trinkets to ward off the whispers. Yet, despite all precautions, disappearances continued. Travelers reported being followed, hearing their names called from the mist, feeling invisible hands brush their skin, tugging them toward the heart of the hollow. The hollow, it seemed, fed on attention, curiosity, and fear. The more a person resisted, the stronger the whispers became. Those who tried to document the phenomenon with cameras or audio equipment often found their devices malfunctioning, recording only static or capturing faint murmurs indistinguishable from the wind. Some researchers reported waking from nightmares, in which shadowed figures whispered cryptic warnings about the boundary between the hollow and the living world. Even today, the Whispering Hollow maintains its reputation. Hikers who attempt the ridge report hearing voices that are unnervingly personal, recounting memories, secrets, and fears only they could know. Shadows dart between trees, never fully visible, always just beyond the edge of perception. The forest waits patiently, luring the brave, the curious, and the foolish into its depths, feeding on their fear and taking whatever it desires. Locals have a saying: the hollow remembers, it listens, it chooses. They claim that once it marks someone, it follows them relentlessly, whispering through dreams and waking moments, shaping their thoughts, guiding their actions, and ultimately claiming them when they falter. The forest is patient, its hunger eternal, its memory long. The most chilling part, according to those who live near Raven's Peak, is that the hollow doesn't need to physically touch you to claim you. A glance into the mist, a fleeting thought, provoked by a whisper, a moment of curiosity, that is enough. The hollow waits for the opportune moment to act, always unseen, always present. Some who enter return, but they are hollowed. Their voices are muted, their eyes sunken, and their minds fractured. They speak of seeing figures that are neither living nor dead, hearing voices that mimic loved ones, and feeling the forest's grip even when miles away. Others vanish entirely, leaving only faint echoes in the fog, a whisper of their existence. And so, the whispering hollow endures. Its branches sway with secrets, its mist curls around hidden paths, and its whispers continue to call out in the dead of night. Those who wander too close, who listen too intently, risk being drawn into the heart of Raven's Peak, becoming yet another voice in the endless chorus that haunts the hollow. Because the hollow remembers, and it is always listening. Let's move to our 8th story. In the heart of Appalachia, tucked away between two forgotten ridges, lies a settlement that once thrived around a mineral spring. Locals called it Hollow Springs, though it was anything but hollow in its history. For over a century, whispers spoke of a bell that hung in the town's old church. Steeple, a bell, said to be cursed, ringing on its own at night, calling the living toward misfortune, and sometimes death. The story of the cursed bell dates back to the late 1800s. The church had been built by the first settlers, a small wooden structure with a single steeple. The bell, a gleaming bronze cast in Pennsylvania, was a gift from a wealthy benefactor who had moved to the town seeking peace. But from the moment it arrived, strange occurrences began. The bell would ring at midnight, though no hands touched. The rope? Sometimes, it would toll multiple times in rapid succession, echoing across the hollow like an unnatural heartbeat. The first recorded incident involved a young boy named Samuel. He had been playing near the church at dusk when the bell rang 3 times loud and sudden. Samuel ran home, but he was never seen again. The townsfolk initially assumed he had wandered into the woods and gotten lost. But the local minister, an elderly man named Father Whitman, insisted that the bell had called him. It chooses, he whispered to anyone who would listen. Over the years, the pattern continued. Residents reported hearing the bell ring during storms when the rope hung motionless. Livestock would vanish. Wells would run dry overnight. Some families moved away, leaving their homes to rot, convinced that the bell brought ill fortune to anyone who remained. One story comes from a woman named Agnes, who lived in Hollow Springs during the 1930s. She was a schoolteacher with 2 children and a husband, who worked the nearby mines. One evening, she heard the bell toll as she tucked her children into bed. At first, she thought it was a wind gust or a prank. But the tolling persisted, rhythmic and hypnotic, calling her name. Agnes felt compelled to step outside, the air thick and still, as if the town itself held its breath. She followed the sound to the church and found the bell rope swinging back and forth, moving without any visible touch. As she reached for the rope, a strange chill ran down her spine. The bell's tone seemed to vibrate in her chest, resonating with something primal. Her vision blurred. For a fleeting moment, she swore she saw shadows rising from the ground around the church. Figures of former townsfolk, hollow-eyed and silent, reaching toward her. Agnes snapped back to reality and stumbled away, never speaking of the incident again. That night, her husband fell ill with a fever that lasted weeks, and one of her children vanished into the woods. In the 1950s, Hollow Springs experienced a resurgence when a preacher named Ezekiel decided to cleanse the town of the bell's curse. He climbed the steeple with a hammer and an iron chain, intent on destroying it. But as he swung the hammer, the bell rang out not with the sound of metal striking metal, but with a deep, resonant voice. Ezekiel claimed it spoke to him in a whisper, promising eternal damnation if he persisted. Terrified, he fled, never returning. The bell remained intact, silent for a time, but it waited. By the 1970s, the legend of the cursed bell had spread to neighboring counties. Teenagers dared one another to touch it, photograph it, or even stay overnight in the church. Most returned, shaken, reporting ringing that echoed in their dreams, whispers that carried their own names, and fleeting glimpses of shadowy figures surrounding the steeple. Some vanished entirely, leaving only broken toys or personal belongings on the church steps. The bell seemed to have a will of its own. It rang for no reason, but only when it desired attention. Residents swore it could sense curiosity and fear. One elderly man claimed that, after decades of living near the bell, he could feel it vibrating in his bones, calling him, warning him, tempting him. When he tried to leave town, he said the bell tolled in the distance, following him as if it could reach across miles. In 1983, a man named Robert, fascinated by the legend, decided to spend a night in the church. He brought a recorder, flashlight, and journal. At midnight, the bell tolled. Robert described feeling a presence pressing against his chest, a cold weight that forced him to kneel. The bell's sound, he wrote, seemed to form words, names, dates, and phrases he could not understand. Shadows danced along the walls, not cast by light, but seemingly their own entities. By dawn, Robert emerged pale and shaken, his hair gray. At the roots, mumbling about voices in the bell, and eyes behind the steeple watching him. He never returned to Hollow Springs. The curse of the bell seems to thrive on attention. Visitors report hearing it even when miles away, a distant tolling that seeps into dreams, beckoning them back to the town. Locals now avoid the church entirely. They say even driving past it at night brings unease. The hair on their arms rises. Shadows lengthen, and the faint ringing echoes in their minds. Some speculate the bell is possessed by the spirits of those lost to it: Samuel, Agnes' child, the vanished teenagers, and perhaps even Ezekiel. Others claim it was forged with ill intent, a gift from someone who understood the dark forces of the mountains. Whatever the truth, one fact remains: the bell chooses who it calls, and those who hear it must obey or disappear. Even today, Hollow Springs is nearly abandoned. A few hardy residents remain, but they speak in hushed tones about the bell, never mentioning it by name. They leave offerings at the church door: coins, candles, small trinkets meant to appease the entity within. At night, when the wind is still and the air hangs thick with fog, the bell rings. Not all hear it, but those who do are forever changed. They feel a tug, a pull toward the church, a compulsion they cannot resist. And if they follow, they rarely return, to this day. Explorers, thrill-seekers, and paranormal investigators venture to Hollow Springs, drawn by the legend. Many leave with recordings or photographs that reveal nothing. Some vanish entirely. Those who survive describe the bell as alive more than metal, more than sound. They speak of a sentience that watches, judges, and claims. Its toll is not random. It is deliberate, personal, and merciless. The cursed bell of Hollow Springs endures, a sentinel of dread atop its silent steeple. It waits for the curious, the brave, and the foolish. When it rings, heed its warning. Curiosity is a dangerous companion in Hollow Springs. The bell calls, and those who answer are never truly free again, because some curses are eternal, and the bell remembers every name, every step, and every soul that dares listen. Let's move to our 9th story. Hollow Ridge is a long, jagged stretch of forested mountains in eastern Appalachia, a place where the fog hangs thick and the wind carries secrets. The ridge has always been avoided after sunset, not only because of steep cliffs and twisted trails, but because of a legend older than the trees themselves, the legend of the Skinless walker. Locals whisper that it is neither fully human nor beast, a creature that roams the mountains at night, hunting for the living, leaving trails of gore and terror. The first written account comes from 1893, when a farmer named Caleb Whitlock disappeared while tending his livestock. He was a robust man, experienced in the forests of the ridge, but neighbors found his farm in disarray. The cows were scattered, the barn door swung open, and a trail of blood led into the woods. They followed the trail to the edge of a cliff, where it ended abruptly. There were no bodies, only the blood, and a faint, terrible stench. For weeks, locals swore they could hear footsteps at night, scraping over leaves and stones, accompanied by a low, wet dragging sound. By the 1920s, the Skinless walker had become a cautionary tale told to children. It was said to appear suddenly, in the fog, skinless and pale, muscles glistening, eyes hollow yet intelligent. It moved silently when it wished, and with terrifying speed when it hunted. Its victims were always found mutilated, drained of blood or flesh in ways impossible to explain, as though the creature followed some horrific pattern. One of the most chilling accounts comes from a man named Henry Collins, a trapper who lived near the ridge in the 1940s. Henry claimed he saw the creature one evening while checking his traps. At first, he thought it was a bear, but the shape was wrong. It stood upright, unnaturally tall, sinews exposed and glistening under the pale moonlight. Its head turned slowly, locking onto him with hollow, merciless eyes. Henry froze, rooted to the spot by a fear unlike anything he had known. The skinless walker did not roar or growl. It simply stared, then moved with impossible speed, disappearing into the fog. Henry never trapped again in Hollow Ridge, and he never spoke of what he saw until decades later. The walker seemed to choose its victims carefully. Farmers, hunters, children alone at Duskull were fair game. Survivors described hearing it. Before seeing it, a wet, dragging sound, followed by low, guttural hissing, then silence, as though the forest itself had swallowed the noise. Some claimed it mimicked human voices, calling out for help or imitating loved ones, drawing unsuspecting travelers closer to their doom. In the 1960s, a pair of teenagers dared each other to hike along the ridge at night. They were laughing and joking, confident in their knowledge of the legend, until the fog rolled in thicker than they had ever seen. The skinless walker appeared silently among the trees, tall and pale, its sinews flexing unnaturally as it advanced. One of the boys screamed when it mimicked his father's voice, calling him into the woods. By morning, only one returned, stumbling to the edge of town, his clothes torn, eyes wide and unseeing. The other had vanished entirely. The survivor claimed he could still hear the creature's voice whispering his name in his sleep, warning him that it had not finished counting. The skinless walker was said to be nearly impossible to kill. Bullets tore through its exposed muscle with minimal effect. Some hunters tried fire, only to have it retreat temporarily, returning when the smoke cleared. Its unnatural resilience gave rise to theories. Some believed it was the spirit of a miner or logger's curse, fused with a vengeful rage that had become flesh. Others whispered that it was a biological anomaly, born from the dark soil and twisted forests of Hollow Ridge. One harrowing account comes from a woman named Martha, who lived with her grandmother in a cabin near the lower slopes of the ridge. In the early 1970s, one evening, Martha heard dragging sounds on the wooden porch outside. Peering into the fog, she saw a pale figure crouched on all fours, sinews taut, eyes fixed on her. It hissed, a wet, guttural sound that made her ears ring. Terrified, she slammed the door and bolted her family inside, praying through the night. By dawn, the walker had vanished, but not before leaving deep gouges on the cabin walls, and a patch of grass flattened, as if something enormous had crawled through it. Martha left Hollow Ridge shortly after, haunted by dreams of sinewy limbs and hollow eyes. The legend continued to grow, fueled by those who returned from the ridge, forever changed. Some spoke of seeing multiple skinless walkers moving in unison, almost like a pack, their pale bodies flickering in and out of the fog. Others recounted waking in the night to find one at the foot of their bed, silent, watching, disappearing before any attempt at defense. Over time, locals came to believe that the walker was not just a predator, it was a sentient guardian of the ridge, punishing intruders and curious souls who ventured too far into the mountains. In the 1990s, a group of hikers attempted to document the creature, setting cameras and recording devices along the trails. They captured faint dragging sounds, whispers, and glimpses of pale, elongated limbs moving through the fog. Some recorded voices, calling out names, voices of missing hikers, whispered pleas for help, distorted by some unnatural echo. When the team returned to review the footage, one of their members had disappeared overnight, leaving behind only a bloodied backpack and a camera that captured a single frame of pale sinews and hollow eyes staring from the mist. Even today, Hollow Ridge remains largely avoided after dark. Farmers and hunters stick to daylight hours, and children are warned never to venture near the fog. Those who dare report an oppressive presence, a sensation of being watched, and the wet dragging sound that heralds the arrival of the skinless walker. Locals claim that even seeing it briefly marks you forever, that the creature remembers your face, your fear, and may follow you beyond the ridge, whispering from the shadows, waiting for the next opportunity. Some theorists believe the walker is drawn to curiosity and fear, feeding off the dread it inspires. Others argue it is a remnant of an old curse. a miner or settler who sought revenge and was transformed by the dark forests and unforgiving soil. Whatever its origin, the creature is patient, intelligent, and relentless, capable of striking at the perfect moment when its prey is most vulnerable. Survivors tell of hallucinations, whispers in the fog, the sensation of being touched by hands when no one is there, and glimpses of hollow eyes reflected in shadows. Travelers have reported the feeling of its gaze, even when miles from the ridge, as if it can track them beyond the mountains, ensuring its legend continues. The skinless walker of Hollow Ridge endures as a sentinel of terror, a living nightmare, woven into the forest itself. Its presence is a warning. The mountains have memory, the fog has voice, and the creature waits patiently for the brave, the curious, and the foolish, who wander too far after dusk. Because, in Hollow Ridge, fear is not just imagined, it is hunted, counted, and claimed. Let's move to our 10th story. Misty Glen is a secluded valley hidden deep within the Appalachian Mountains, shrouded in perennial fog and thick, whispering pines. Generations of locals have avoided it, speaking only in hushed tones of the hollow. Children, apparitions of lost or stolen children said to roam the glen at dusk. It is a place where the sun rarely penetrates the mist, where shadows twist unnaturally, and where the valley itself seems to remember every misdeed committed within its bounds. The legend began in the early 1800s. Settlers claimed that a series of mysterious disappearances plagued the area, children vanishing from their beds, playgrounds, or the edge of the forest with no trace left behind. Parents would hear faint giggles carried on the fog, only to find their children gone upon investigation. Over time, locals whispered that the valley itself claimed the children, turning them into hollow-eyed spirits, forever wandering the glen. By the late 1800s, those who claimed to have encountered the hollow children reported eerie phenomena. Shadows darted between the trees, always accompanied by the soft, hollow echoes of childish laughter. Travelers reported that calling out to the children only caused the fog to thicken, surrounding them with a disorienting mist that made it impossible to leave. Those who attempted to follow the voices found themselves looping endlessly through the glen, their surroundings subtly shifting, until exhaustion or despair forced them to retreat or vanish entirely. One of the earliest well-documented encounters involves a woman named Lillian Hayes. Lillian had recently moved to the glen with her 2 young children, seeking a quiet life away from the bustle of nearby towns. One evening, she was preparing dinner when she heard giggling outside her cabin. At first, she assumed it was neighboring children, but the laughter was strange, echoing, distorted, almost hollow. She stepped outside and found a group of pale, ethereal children standing near the tree line, fog curling around them. Their eyes were dark voids, and their skin appeared unnaturally smooth and pale. Lillian called to them, but the hollow children did not respond in any human way. Instead, they began to advance toward her, moving with a silent, almost gliding motion. Panicked, she retreated into her cabin, locking the door. That night, she reported hearing soft knocks and whispers just outside her walls. When she finally dared to step outside at dawn, the children were gone, leaving only a patch of flattened grass and small handprints that seemed to vanish when approached. Her own children had disappeared as well, never to return. Over the decades, numerous accounts repeated similar details. The hollow children never spoke in full sentences. Their presence was accompanied by a cold mist and an unsettling silence. Those who observed them closely reported an emptiness behind their eyes, as if the spirits carried all the lost souls of the valley within them. Some claimed the children mimicked the voices of loved ones, calling out to lure people into the glen. Others insisted the children could sense guilt, grief, or fear, preying on these emotions to trap the living. A particularly chilling encounter occurred in the 1950s, when a group of local boys dared one another to explore the glen at night. They laughed and joked at first, but as the fog thickened, they realized the valley had transformed. The familiar trees seemed unfamiliar, shifting subtly, and the air grew heavy with the scent of damp earth and something else, something faintly metallic, like blood. Soon they heard giggles and whispers, soft at first, then echoing around them, each whisper uttering their names. One by one the boys became separated, drawn deeper into the mist by the voices of the hollow children. When they finally regrouped near the edge of the glen, 2 of them were missing. The survivors described the children as pale, featureless, and impossibly fast, gliding between trees and shadows, their hollow eyes fixed on the living. They swore that the children laughed as the others vanished, a sound that haunted their dreams for years afterward. Locals insist that the hollow children are not bound to a specific time. Some have reported seeing them in the early morning mist, others at night. Travelers who camp near Misty Glen sometimes awake to find tiny handprints on their tents or small cold figures standing silently in the fog outside. Those who try to take photographs often discover the images distorted. The children appear blurry, with unnaturally elongated limbs or voided eyes, as if the camera cannot capture their true form. In the 1970s, a folklorist named Margaret Renfield attempted to document the phenomenon. She spent nights wandering the glen, taking meticulous notes and recording sounds. On her 3rd night, she reported seeing a group of children standing in a clearing, hands linked, eyes black as night. She claimed that as she approached, the fog thickened, and the children began to chant softly, a sound that seemed both distant and inside her own head. Panicked, she fled the glen, leaving her notebooks behind. When she returned to retrieve them, the pages were blank. Except for the faint outline of small handprints smeared across the paper, the hollow children seemed to thrive on curiosity and fear. Those who approach the glen with skepticism often find themselves ensnared anyway, unable to resist the soft, pleading voices calling their names. Parents who ignore warnings sometimes awaken to find their children missing, replaced by pale, hollow figures that vanish at sunrise. The valley remembers, and it collects. Every child lost, every soul claimed, becomes part of the chorus that whispers through the mist. Even today, Misty Glen is largely avoided. Local residents leave offerings at the edge of the forest, trinkets, toys, or small tokens meant to appease the hollow children. On foggy nights, the valley is said to come alive with whispers, giggles, and faint footsteps. Hikers report a disorienting feeling, as if the landscape subtly shifts around them, guiding them deeper into the mist. Some leave terrified but unharmed. Others vanish without a trace. The hollow children are patient. They do not chase recklessly, but move silently, always observing, always calculating. Their presence is accompanied by a cold that penetrates clothing, a faint scent of damp earth, and a low, almost inaudible whispering that seems to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Witnesses report that looking into their eyes can induce nausea, dizziness, or hallucinations, as if the children feed on the observer's very perception of reality. Accounts of survivors often describe an overwhelming sense of guilt or longing. The hollow children are said to reflect the deepest fears of those who enter the glen, drawing them into the mist and offering a cruel mirror of loss and regret. Even after escaping, many report being haunted by fleeting glimpses of the pale figures in distant fog, their hollow eyes silently watching, waiting for the next opportunity. Some speculate that the children are the spirits of those who died in the valley, taken long ago by unknown forces. Others believe the hollow children are manifestations of the glen itself, a sentient, malevolent force using the guise of children to lure the living into its domain. Regardless of origin, one truth remains: Misty Glen is not a place for the curious or the unwary. Those who enter risk becoming part of the valley's endless chorus, joining the hollow children in their eternal, haunting laughter. The valley endures, shrouded in mist and memory, a place where time bends and shadows whisper. The hollow children roam freely, collecting the lost and curious, ensuring the legend persists. Those who hear their laughter and survive are forever changed, haunted by what they cannot see and cannot forget. In Misty Glen, the mist never lifts completely, the forest never ceases its whispering, and the hollow children never stop watching. Their patience is infinite, their hunger subtle yet relentless. Any who venture too close, too curious, too skeptical, may find themselves drawn into the fog, becoming hollow themselves. Another voice in the valley's eternal song of fear, because in Misty Glen, innocence is never safe, and the fog remembers every name, every step, and every soul it claims. Let's move to our 11th story. Black Hollow is a narrow valley tucked deep in the Appalachian Mountains. Shrouded by centuries of dense forest and shadowed cliffs, the hollow has long been feared by locals, not only for its treacherous terrain, but for the legend of the Weeping Widow. It is said that she appears at dusk, a pale, spectral woman in tattered black garments, wandering along the old trails and abandoned homesteads, wailing for her lost husband. Those who hear her cries are drawn into the hollow, never to return or return, forever changed. The tale originates in the mid-1800s. A woman named Elisa McGrath lived on the edge of Black Hollow with her husband Thomas, a lumberman. One day, Thomas did not return from the forest. Elisa searched endlessly, calling his name through the dense trees, until she collapsed from exhaustion near a cliff overlooking the hollow. Her cries echoed across the valley, piercing the stillness of the forest. When she did not return to her home, neighbors assumed she had perished. But those who ventured near the hollow later claimed to see her wandering, wailing, pale as bone, eyes hollow with grief. Over time, the legend grew. Travelers and hunters reported hearing weeping at dusk, a high-pitched, sorrowful cry that seemed to follow them through the trees. The sound was unlike anything human, stretching and twisting, echoing unnaturally through the hollow. Those who approached the sound swore they saw a woman in black, gliding across the forest floor, her hair long and tangled, dragging behind her like dark smoke. Sometimes, she would vanish before anyone could reach her. Other times, she appeared, closer than physically possible, standing silently and staring with hollow eyes. The Weeping Widow seemed to have a compulsion to follow grief itself. Locals tell stories of people drawn into Black Hollow while mourning lost loved ones. Those who followed the cries often became lost for hours, sometimes days, wandering through twisted trails and fog-choked paths. Survivors reported seeing glimpses of the widow, floating just out of reach, her sobs echoing in their minds, growing louder whenever they tried to leave. Some claimed to feel cold fingers brush their arms, though nothing was ever seen. One particularly chilling account comes from a hunter named Samuel Keaton in the 1920s. Samuel had lost his wife and child to illness, and his grief weighed heavily upon him. One evening, while walking near Black Hollow, he heard soft weeping carried on the wind. He called out, hoping for comfort or guidance, and saw the widow standing on a ridge above him, her form pale and wavering like smoke. Her voice called his name, echoing his sorrow. Samuel followed instinctively, stepping into a dense fog that seemed to rise from the hollow itself. Hours later, he emerged at the edge of the forest, unharmed physically but forever changed. He spoke of hallucinations, shadows whispering his memories back at him, and of a cold presence that lingered long after leaving the hollow. The Weeping Widow did not harm everyone outright, but her presence was never benign. Witnesses often returned with nightmares, strange marks on their skin, or a lingering cold that no fire could dispel. Some reported hearing her crying in the distance, even after leaving the hollow, her voice carried on the wind for miles. Locals believed she was tethered to the grief of others, drawing strength from sorrow and despair. Those who confronted her directly sometimes claimed she could mimic voices of lost loved ones, calling to lure people further into the hollow. In the 1950s, a family attempting to settle near Black Hollow experienced the widow firsthand. The father, mother, and 2 children had moved to a cabin at the forest's edge. At night, they heard soft sobs drifting through the fog. Initially dismissing it as the wind, the family grew uneasy when the cries became more distinct, forming coherent words, the names of their deceased relatives. Windows rattled, doors creaked, and shadows moved unnaturally across the cabin walls. Eventually, the family fled, leaving behind furniture and belongings. When neighbors visited the cabin later, they found it empty and frost-covered despite the season, and the weeping continued faintly, echoing through the hollow. Some stories suggest the widow is more than a ghost, perhaps a vessel for the accumulated grief and tragedy of Black Hollow over centuries. Locals claim that those who venture too close often see her face reflected in water or mirrors. Always pale, always sorrowful, and with eyes that seem to follow their every move. She is said to appear both near and far, sometimes glimpsed in fleeting moments, sometimes manifesting fully, her cries filling the forest with unnatural resonance. The legend grew in intensity during the 1970s and 1980s, when urban explorers and thrill-seekers began venturing into Black Hollow. Many returned shaken, speaking of endless fog, twisting trails, and a low, keening sob that seemed to pierce their minds. Some claimed to feel hands brush their arms or shoulders, though nothing was visible. A few reported faint images of the widow appearing in photographs taken near the hollow, her form barely visible, yet unmistakable, as if captured between worlds. Locals caution that the widow is not bound by time or place. Her cries can appear in the deepest fog of the hollow, on quiet forest trails, or even echo faintly in towns at the hollow's edge. Travelers are advised never to follow the sound, as it leads into a liminal space where reality becomes malleable, and direction loses meaning. Those who ignore the warnings often vanish, leaving behind only echoing sobs and traces of frost or dew, as if the hollow itself claimed them. Even today, Black Hollow is largely avoided after sunset. Hikers and hunters stick to well-trodden paths, and children are warned to stay clear. Those who linger report a feeling of being watched, a sensation of cold sadness pressing upon them, and glimpses of a pale figure gliding through the fog. Survivors insist the widow is patient and intelligent, drawn to human sorrow, but careful to maintain an air of spectral inevitability. She does not chase recklessly. She waits, observes, and slowly ensnares those who come too close. The weeping widow's presence has been tied to natural phenomena as well. Fog thickens around her, the temperature drops noticeably, and forest animals flee in unusual patterns. Sounds seem distorted, echoes lingering longer than natural acoustics should allow. Witnesses report that the hollow itself seems to bend subtly, guiding intruders deeper into its heart. Shadows shift unnaturally, and familiar landmarks may appear out of place, leaving travelers disoriented and vulnerable. Accounts from the 1990s onward describe subtle manipulations of perception. Some claim to have followed the cries for hours, only to find themselves at the exact spot where they began, disoriented but unharmed. Others report faint whispers of lost loved ones, urging them onward, voices that echo from fog and shadows. Those who have survived multiple encounters with the widow describe a lasting imprint, a sense of sorrow, dislocation, and constant low-level dread. The legend of the weeping widow persists because Black Hollow itself seems alive. It remembers those who enter, collects their grief, and manifests sorrow as tangible fear. The widow is both a guardian and a predator, a reminder that certain places are tethered to human emotion, and that grief can linger long after life has moved on. Her sorrow is eternal, her vigilance unyielding, and her cries a lure for the curious. The lost and the mourning in Black Hollow, night never fully releases its hold. Mist lingers, shadows twist unnaturally, and the weeping widow waits. Her sorrow is both a warning and a weapon, a specter of grief and longing that draws attention like a magnet. Those who hear her cries must resist the compulsion to follow, for the hollow does not forgive, and the widow does not forget. Because in Black Hollow, grief has form, sorrow has weight, and the weeping widow watches all who dare step too close. Let's move to our 12th story. Devil's Creek is a narrow, winding waterway snaking through the jagged Appalachian foothills, notorious for its steep banks and dense, shadowed forests. For generations, locals have avoided the creek at night, not just because of its treacherous terrain, but because of the legend of the Lantern Man. It is said that a solitary figure wanders the banks of Devil's Creek after dusk, holding a lantern that glows unnaturally bright. Travelers who see the light are drawn toward it, and those who follow it often vanish, swallowed by the darkness, the water, or something far more sinister. The earliest accounts date back to the 1800s. Loggers and settlers working along Devil's Creek would occasionally report a pale figure, tall and thin, gliding along the water's edge with a lantern held aloft. Some claimed he was human, though his proportions seemed distorted, his movements unnaturally fluid. Others swore he was a spirit or demon, an omen of death, who appeared to lure the curious or the greedy into the swampy banks and fogged water. The legend spread quickly, and the locals learned to avoid the creek after sunset. One of the first well-documented disappearances involved a young man named Elias Crow. In 1872, Elias, known for his curiosity and daring, stayed late near the creek, intent on mapping the area for logging purposes. As twilight fell, he spotted a faint light flickering across the water. Mesmerized, he walked toward it. Witnesses claimed he called out, asking if anyone was there, but only silence answered him. He never returned, and search parties found no trace except his notebook, soaked and torn, lying abandoned near the water's edge. Over the years, many others reported similar encounters. Travelers often described the lantern man as impossibly tall, his face hidden beneath the brim of a wide hat or shrouded in shadow, and his lantern casting light that seemed unnatural, sometimes cold blue, sometimes burning orange, flickering, as if alive. Those who observed him noted a strange pull, a compulsion to follow the light, even against reason. The deeper one walked into the fog toward the lantern, the more disoriented they became, until paths seemed to twist back upon themselves, and landmarks vanished. A particularly chilling account comes from a woman named Hattie McKinley in the 1930s. Hattie was a local schoolteacher, known for her bravery and skepticism of ghost stories. One evening, while walking along the creek after visiting a sick neighbor, she spotted the lantern man standing on a rocky outcropping. She described him as impossibly still, holding a lantern that glowed with a cold, pulsating light. Despite her fear, she approached cautiously, determined to uncover the truth. As she drew nearer, the air grew unnaturally cold, and the ground beneath her seemed to shift subtly, leading her in circles. When she finally stumbled onto firm ground, the lantern man was gone, leaving only the faint echo of footsteps and the lingering glow of the lantern in the fog. Hattie never spoke of the encounter publicly, but she grew wary of the creek and avoided it entirely for the rest of her life. The lantern man seemed to feed not on flesh, but on attention, curiosity, and obsession. Those who tried to study him or map his appearances often became consumed with sightings, their lives increasingly dominated by dreams, visions, and compulsions to return to Devil's Creek. Families reported loved ones disappearing after obsessively talking about the lantern man, often leaving cryptic notes or maps indicating where they intended to go, never to be seen again. In the 1950s, a group of loggers decided to camp along the creek, skeptical of the legend. They laughed and joked, daring each other to approach the water at night. As darkness fell, a faint light appeared across the creek. Small at first, then growing brighter, closer, yet impossible to approach directly. One by one, the men claimed to see glimpses of the lantern mantle, thin movements, fluid, lantern, glowing with unnatural colors. When morning came, 2 men were missing, and the survivors spoke of being drawn into dreams of walking toward the light endlessly, feeling the pull even when awake. The lantern man was said to manipulate perception. Witnesses reported that the creek would appear to stretch, paths would loop unnaturally, and sounds of running water would echo from impossible directions. Those who lingered too long would hear whispers, soft and indistinct, calling their names, or speaking promises of hidden treasures or secret knowledge. The longer someone stared at the lantern, the more they felt compelled to follow it, as if the light itself had a will. Some locals theorized that the lantern man was the spirit of a logger who had died in a flood along Devil's Creek, transformed into a liminal being tethered to the water, eternally guiding or deceiving the curious. Others suggested something far older, a dark force rooted in the land itself, preying on human curiosity and fear. Whatever the origin, all accounts agreed that the lantern man was patient, persistent, and impossible to outwit. One of the most frightening accounts comes from a man named Thomas Hale. In the 1970s, Thomas, a young hunter, had camped near Devil's Creek. Late one evening, he saw the lantern flickering in the distance. Driven by curiosity, he approached slowly, but the fog thickened around him, and the path twisted unnaturally. The light seemed to retreat as he moved closer, drawing him deeper into the forest. Hours later, he found himself standing on the creek's edge, disoriented and exhausted, the lantern gone. He claimed he could still hear its faint glow and soft footsteps in his dreams for months afterward, compelling him to return to the creek. He never did. The lantern man was also reported to appear during storms or heavy fog. times when the creek was most treacherous. Witnesses spoke of the lantern casting reflections on the water that seemed to move independently, sometimes showing twisted, distorted images of themselves or of loved ones. Some explorers who attempted to photograph the lantern found the images warped, blurred, or showing impossible shapes, elongated limbs, distorted faces, and shifting light patterns that seemed alive. In recent decades, the legend persists. Locals warn hikers and campers to avoid Devil's Creek after dusk, particularly during foggy nights. Those who do encounter the lantern are advised to ignore it completely, to avoid curiosity, to turn away and retreat slowly. Survivors of encounters often describe a lingering compulsion, a pull toward the creek or the lantern in dreams, as if the force itself has extended beyond the physical realm to manipulate memory and desire. The Lantern Man embodies more than fear. He is a master of subtle terror, exploiting human traits like curiosity, obsession, and hope. He does not strike violently or loudly, but with quiet, insidious persistence. Even the mere sight of the lantern at a distance can be enough to change a person, leading to nights of haunted dreams, obsessive thoughts, and compulsion to seek the light. Accounts suggest that once a person becomes enthralled by the lantern, the force grows stronger, pulling them further into the creek's shadowed banks. Some theorists claim that Devil's Creek itself is a liminal zone, a place where time and space bend, and the Lantern Man is a sentinel or manifestation of that power. Others argue that he is a spirit bound to a tragic past, seeking both company and revenge, punishing those who dare trespass. Even today, Devil's Creek is approached with caution. Local residents leave markers, sticks, or other small tokens near the creek to ward off the lantern. Hikers report that the fog seems thicker near these markers, and that the lantern sometimes appears in multiple locations simultaneously, as if aware of human attempts to resist. Sightings are rare but persistent, and the legend continues to grow with each generation. The Lantern Man is patient. He does not chase recklessly, but waits for those who show curiosity or obsession. He lures slowly, methodically, bending perception, twisting paths, and exploiting the human mind's natural desire for discovery. The light is beautiful and terrifying simultaneously, a lure impossible to ignore. Those who follow it rarely return, and those who do often speak in hushed tones, their eyes haunted, forever changed by the pull of Devil's Creek. Because in Devil's Creek, light can be as deadly as darkness, and the Lantern Man waits for those foolish enough to follow.